What does it truly mean to live life as a giver? Not just occasionally, but as a mindset, a discipline, and a way of life. Welcome to Money to Give with me, Rick Peck, the Philanthropy Guy. With over 20 years in the nonprofit sector, I've seen hundreds of millions of dollars transferred from donors to nonprofits. I've learned a lot along the way that I want to help convey to you, my loyal listeners. In this podcast series, we talk about 1, how nonprofits can most effectively showcase their mission and vision and raise as much money as possible. 2, how donors and potential donors can make the greatest impact possible in the world. And 3, how professional advisors, including philanthropy advisors, can offer the most up-to-date information and services to their clients. So join us here each episode for more of that giving feeling. Today, I'm joined by Bishop Kevin Foreman for a conversation about generosity, leadership, legacy, and the mindset behind sustainable philanthropy. Together, we explore why some people move from reactive giving into intentional impact, and how donors, nonprofits, and families can develop healthier relationships with generosity, abundance, and service. Bishop Foreman shares powerful insights about what it means to become a disciplined giver, how generational patterns influence the way we think about money and philanthropy, and why solving real community problems requires more than simply writing checks. We also discuss leadership, systems, collaboration, measurable impact, and the importance of understanding not just what problems we want to solve, but why those problems matter to us in the first place. This conversation is thoughtful, practical, inspiring, and deeply rooted in purpose. Let's begin. Bishop Foreman, from your perspective, what is the biggest disconnect between people's desire to give and their ability to give consistently and strategically in a way that produces lasting impact?
I think one is frankly the execution. I think sometimes the difference, the gap between desire and execution becomes that we are quietly negotiating with ourselves all the time. Well, maybe I can't do this. Maybe I shouldn't do this. What about this? Worry can sometimes come in where I'm worried about what may happen in the future, worried about this, looking at markets, looking at my home price, looking at this, looking at that. There's so many things that factor into it. And I think part of being a person that is a giver, I have a saying that says, faithful givers flourish. If you pour into, you will be poured into, and making it just like you treat a bill, making it just like you treat something that has to be done every month. That's the way I view philanthropic efforts and giving and pouring into others, is that I treat this as something that I have to do, not something that's an option. Because if you treat it that way, you will always quietly negotiate with yourself. You will always quietly find ways to maybe pull back or to not do. And so I think one of the best things to do is simply be a doer. I have a saying, go with the goers. When you're a goer, when you're a doer, things go with you, things are done for you. I think those quiet negotiations that we sometimes have can be a major disconnect. And then I think, secondly, underestimating the value of what our philanthropic efforts and our giving is actually doing in the lives of other people. Sometimes we can look at how great the need is and perhaps juxtapose that to what we're contributing towards that and think, you know what, this isn't really making a difference. But you know what? To that one, it is. I'm sure you're familiar with that
Yeah.
story, and I'm probably going to butcher it. The story about what is it? The sea stars, sea
Yes.
stars,
Yes.
and the little boy's going on the beach, and he's picking up and he's throwing them back in the ocean, throwing them back in the ocean. And the one guy says, "Look, there's so many on the beach, it's not going to make any difference. What difference are you making?" And he says, well, to that one, it does. To
That's
that
right.
one, it does. And I think we have to view it that same way. It's don't let the size of the need make you think that what you're doing isn't significant and isn't needed.
No, I love that story that you just told, and it's true. I want to talk about what you mentioned around negotiation. I think that it will start with people's basic needs, right? They want to eat, they want to sleep, they need to, have shelter and take care of themselves. And when you talked about negotiation, it sounds like in its purest sense, when you're giving to give, you're giving because people need help and you're selflessly pouring yourself into helping them. But when you're talking about negotiation, it sounds more like people are saying, well, if I do this for them, hopefully they'll do this for me. And then you're having this, as you say, that silent sort of conversation that you might be having. So just talk about that a little bit. I mean, I think it's natural for people to say, well, I don't want to give so much of myself that I'm not getting anything back. But it sounds like what you're saying is if you're pouring into other people, chances are, and you're around people like that, chances are they're also pouring into you. It's not even a negotiation at all. It's just the way, it's almost like an ethos. It's the way we operate. It's the way we show up, right? So I mean, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think starfish. I said sea star, starfish. It was
Starfish.
escaping me,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
knew what I meant.
Yeah.
Everybody knew what I meant. But I think the negotiations should be around a variety of different things. I think the reality is I don't think you should set yourself on fire to keep everybody else warm.
Mm.
At the same time, I don't think that you have to always negotiate in such a way that when you think to release something is to lose something. I like to view it this way: it leaves my hand, but it doesn't leave my life.
Mm.
It leaves my hand, but it doesn't leave my life. I'm as I pour into other people, that's coming back to me. You know, it's a principle. You reap what you sow. Some people may refer to that as karma, but the principle is this: if I release it, I'll receive it.
Yeah.
Whatever I want to get, I first have to give. And so those negotiations can be around a variety of things. It can be about wanting an instantaneous return. It can be about wanting to get something back from someone immediately, as you just mentioned. And I think, there's this scripture that says we reap what we sow. And I always like to say, you may reap what you sow, but not necessarily where you sowed it from.
Mm.
So you may sow in place A, but reap in place Z. You may sow in person A, but reap in person D. So the reality is, if you have the mentality of, and this is what I literally say to myself, I make my living from my giving.
Yeah.
I don't work or do what I do to make a living. I make my living from my giving. It takes away some of those internal negotiations, because they can be a variety of things. You can think, well, can I get something back? It can be, well, is this to my detriment? What good is it doing? Those negotiations can be a bunch of different things. And I think when you just make it a decision, a mantra, a way of life for you that giving is how I make my living, it takes away a lot of those negotiations that can come up.
Yeah, that makes sense because you wake up and say that's just who I am. That's how I wake up. I think on the other side, though, is that maybe for those who are skeptical of that behavior, they'll say, well, what if you get taken advantage of? What if people consistently try to maximize how much you can give them and they don't really try to help out? But I like what you said, that maybe the person you're talking to isn't necessarily going to reciprocate or give back more than you gave them, but maybe you're going to get that from somebody else in a different
Yes.
way. So it's almost like
Yes.
in the universe, in the
Mhm.
ecosystem, people will be showing up and giving you a lot, and you'll go, wow, that person just gave me 5 connections. I barely met them. And this person, I've been putting a lot of time and energy into this person, and I'm not getting a lot back, but that's just the way life is. I'm able to help them. Maybe they're giving back as much as they can, which maybe isn't very much right now. Maybe they're older and they can't provide as much as they used to, but maybe they did at one point in their lives too. So there's also the time element, I suppose, that maybe these are people that were big givers 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and they're not as much now. Maybe that'll be the same for you and me, right? We might give a lot today, and maybe in the future we're not able to give as much for physical reasons or mental reasons. But it sounds like your overarching theme is just go out there and give and know that somehow the universe is going to take care of people. If you don't exhibit that type of behavior, it can be limiting to all parties, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just got to throw this on there. Here's one of the other things that I believe: nobody has the ability to use me or take advantage of me. At best, you become a place where I sow. And that's why I like to use the word sow, because it's a seed. And if you think of a seed like a farmer, you plant and you plant a variety of different things, and there will be harvest. Those things will be recouped in your life and greater. A seed's always smaller than the harvest. I think properly contextualizing it and properly having the right mindset around it is really essential, because again, to what you just said, it's just who I am. It's just what I do. So it's not so much if I do this for you, quid pro quo. The reality is, you don't have the ability to take advantage of me. At best, you simply became a place where I poured and I'll be poured back into. At best, you became a place I sowed, I'll be sowed back into, even if it's not through you. So no one has the ability to use you or take advantage of you. I think that is a mentality that people have to divorce themselves from, because it can create stingy, it can create selfish, and can create a very cynical, very guarded people. And I think that's what you have happening a lot in culture today is the, the dog eat dog culture. Like if I do anything to help you, it's to my detriment. Not so. You don't have the ability to use me. You don't have the ability to take advantage of me because I live my life as a giver. So everything I do is a net increase for me.
That's such an interesting point of view because I would think some people would say, you do have the ability to take advantage of me. Therefore, I am going to pull back because I feel like what you're doing right now is I was giving you a lot of what I could give you, but now I feel like you're just taking that from me. So, but I like the fact that you just say it's all in your own state of mind as a person who is a giver to say, if you live your life this way, then you can make choices too, right? Every day you can make a choice to divert your attention from here to there and continue to give, maybe less so over here, maybe more so over here, but
Exactly.
you're not being taken advantage of because you are in control and you are able to make those choices for yourself on where you spend your time and attention, right?
Absolutely, and I love the part you say. Just to put a nice asterisk on that, if you will, is that you can obviously, and I think we all can look at scenarios where we can say, you know what, this might be better utilized X in X place in X way, and I think that part becomes part of the discretion. But it doesn't make me decide that because one person or one organization or one whatever because they were irresponsible or whatever the adjective might be there, that changes who I am. Because what I do is I live my life in a way that this is just who I am. And so you just, maybe I'm not going to do that for you, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to stop doing it. Right. Just
Right,
because I'm
right.
not going to pour in this plate doesn't mean I'm going to stop pouring in plates. That
Yeah,
type.
that's a fantastic mentality, which says when you're discouraged in one situation, you get to wake up tomorrow and try something else with somebody else, and
Yes.
never stop that way of living and frame of mind. So
Yes.
excellent. So, all right, I have another question. Talking about mindsets, what mindsets or generational patterns do you see that keep donors and families stuck in reactive giving rather than moving toward intentional, legacy focused philanthropy?
Really, really good. I think it really connects to that first answer. I think one is not necessarily seeing good patterns modeled, where you see often patterns where people, like we just talked about, they're giving in an effort to get something, to do something. Which again, it doesn't mean that you can't have an expectation of reaping something that you sow, but that's a very different thing than again a quid pro quo. I'm doing this and I'm expecting this. So I think one, when you've not seen good patterns in your bloodline, in your family, in your community, around you, it can become a very foreign thing. I mean, think about it. We often celebrate when individuals, oh look, so and so did this, so and so did that, as it relates to philanthropic efforts. When the reality is, for that individual, more often than not, well, this is just what we do. This is just who we are. This is just part of being blessed. We're blessed to bless. We're blessed to be a blessing. So I think not seeing it can create a paradigm where you don't realize that is normal behavior. Especially, you typically see very successful families, organizations, businesses, whatever it might be. They typically always have some philanthropic arm to what it is that they do. And while there's a variety of reasons for that, it goes back to that first principle is that release brings increase. Faithful givers flourish. I'm planting, it leaves my hand, not my life. All of those principles really speak to legacy type giving, where this is something we're setting up to make sure that we can do in our family. And many families, just let's face it, just have not seen that, have not seen it modeled, have not seen good patterns for it, don't even know how to do it in a way that can have legacy in mind. I think the second thing I would say to that generationally is if you come from lack, sometimes one of the interesting things that I always find is you can have this very polarized dichotomy where if you've come from lack or you have to come up from your bootstraps and you have to come from nothing, turn it into something, you can have this dichotomy where you have some who are very generous, and then you can have some who are, they won't give you 15 cents. There's this dichotomy that can happen, and I think some of the trauma around finance and money and wealth building and generational wealth and all of those things. I think there's some trauma that can be there depending on a person's background. You can see those two polar opposites, and many times that is something also that I think is generational. It's something that we see passed down. Typically, your mindset about money is not going to be too far removed from who was before you. It's not too far removed from who was before them. And so this is why I'm a big believer. One of my books was called Sins of the Fathers, about breaking generational curses. Curses just a fancy word for just a destructive pattern of behavior that's passed down and around. We do it because we know it, but not because it necessarily is beneficial. And I think those two things really speak to a lot of the challenges that people have generationally. And then if I could just throw a third one on there, some of it is just a lack of preparation. People, by the time they're ready to become, again, I'll use my term giver because I think it's so vast, because it's more than just money. By the time they're ready to do that, they weren't really prepared to do that. They didn't prepare their lives to do that. They didn't think about it in their 20s and 30s and 40s and so on. And so as they begin to, matriculate in age, sometimes there's the desire, back to our first question, but there's not the ability to execute because there wasn't preparation. There wasn't preparation because they never saw anyone prepare.
That's an excellent point. It makes me think about a conversation I had last month with a couple who are in their late 30s, and they inherited a lot of money from her grandmother. What was interesting is that they both spoke to the fact that their parents, they said, were not philanthropic. So I'm going to break that down with you, though. This is what they said. They said they weren't serving on boards, they weren't doing work on nonprofits, they weren't giving money to nonprofits, but their mentality was they were still helping their family. So they would still take care of their own, but they weren't doing what some would call their civic duty, where they're getting out there and doing things. So back to your point about not understanding or not seeing it modeled, for them, they honestly felt like they were on this journey all by themselves. They had received more money than they ever thought they would ever receive. They were trying to figure out, should we have jobs now? I mean, how do we live our life now? This has completely disrupted how we think about our future. We don't even know how to talk to our daughter about it. She's only 10 years old. So what are we going to do now? And so it was just it was really kind of messing them up, actually. And not that they weren't appreciative, but they were trying to say, this is a whole new paradigm for us. And we don't really have a model here. We didn't really talk to my grandmother about this. We certainly didn't have these kinds of conversations with our parents. So they were really trying to figure it out. And so part of my conversation with them was, well, let's figure this out together. Like, where do you want to start? What are your values? What are the things that you care about? What are the issue areas that you want to focus on? Why do you do what you do now? How would you want to incorporate your daughter into this moving forward? So in other words, let's forge this path together. Even if you don't have a model, you can speak with people who can help you figure that out, and maybe use other examples or bring other people into the equation as you like or not, to help you navigate this journey. So you're not sitting there with all this money going, I feel guilty spending it. I don't know what I should do. Should I be giving it away? How much should I give away? Should I be in the community? Should I reveal how much money I have? Should I be quiet about it? I mean, it's just really fascinating, And then the second story I'll tell you is, it reminds me, when you talk about generationally, I remember talking to a grandmother the grandmother came from, actually, ironically, she came from wealth. But she was very funny about how she was treating her kids and her grandkids, as if to say, she was almost like, I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. You should too. And by the way, and I'm just channeling what she would say right now. She'd be like, I'm not sure my kids really appreciate what I've given them. I definitely think that my grandkids don't appreciate what I've given them. And so it's that whole family dynamic thing, which is to say, they're not necessarily being modeled to be this sort of abundance mentality. We're all in this together. Let's figure out how we can be generous together. It's almost like there's this friction or uh, confusion or almost bad feelings about money, bad feelings about what it means to help other people, and even in your family, like what does it mean to is giving them money or giving them extra resources helping them or hurting them? It goes back to what you're saying about that generational mentality or very individualistic mentality, because this individual just happens to feel this way, and she's not going to, in her late 80s, she's probably not going to be changing her mind about how she feels about these things. The best thing I could have done in that situation is said, which I did, maybe you should talk to your grandkids. They're not even here. You're making assumptions that they don't appreciate you or appreciate what you've done. Maybe you should just have a conversation. And then one of the kids in the room said, "Oh, yeah, Mom, the grandkids definitely appreciate what you've done. You just need to have that conversation with them." So anyway, that's all to say your point about generationally and legacy. It can be tough to navigate if you haven't necessarily had a role model that feels like there's this feeling of abundance, give back, give to the best that you can give. The world's going to be okay if we just use that same frame of mind. Instead, it's more like, watch out, or this is scary, or I'm not sure what to do. It's anyway, I think people just need to be around other people who can help them navigate that space when it seems confusing.
Absolutely. And I love what you said because so many nuances in that, right? That the one couple, what do we do? How do we do this? Do we talk about this? It's crazy how you could receive something that is supposed to empower, but it can be disempowering in the sense that that couple was saying, we don't want to feel guilty about what do we do? How do we talk about it? There's so many nuances. And I think that's why looking at and I want to say one size doesn't fit all either. So when you look at a model, to your point, having a voice that can be a voice of wisdom, I think is so important, and voices that can be voices of wisdom to say, how will I set up what I do? How will I do what I do? And I think it's so important. Even when you mention the grandmother, I think a lot of the times when people think someone's being unappreciative or ungrateful, a lot of that is because, and this goes a little bit deeper, it's because the way they would show appreciation is not the same way they show
Right,
appreciation, wherever
right,
they are. So what ends up happening that, those folks, they just don't appreciate it. They don't do that. Well, your love language is words of affirmation. So you wanted them to say something. Their love language is acts of service. So they just started doing things, right? And
right.
so there is this misinterpretation of what appreciation even looks like. And it goes a bit deeper back to generational. How were you formed? How were you shaped? What patterns and models were you given so that that really shapes how you move? My mom is one of the most generous people that you just would ever come across. One of the most loving people you'd ever come across. In fact, we just redid this particular room, and she's an interior designer, and so she wrote me a little note. She got "love you" on it and all of that in my sticky pad. I bring that up to simply say I saw generosity, and not always from places where it was coming from a superabundance, but the mentality was, I'm blessed to bless.
Yeah.
So this is what we do. If we can meet the need, we meet the need. So a lot of that shaped how I move and how I operate. And that's the pattern. And again, it's not one size fits all. You have to really have voices that can help speak to what do we do? How do we do it? What's the fit for us or myself? What's the fit? So then that way I can move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you had that experience with your mom, so you know what generosity and selflessness looks like, and
Yes.
even to this day, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
so all right, well, let's talk about another question I have for you. When you examine communities with the greatest needs, what do you believe philanthropy alone cannot solve without leadership, structure, and well-designed systems guiding how resources are deployed?
So important. So if money fixed everything by itself, then money would have fixed everything by itself. I think so. I mean, we can clearly look at that and say clearly just throwing money at something doesn't fix it. Sometimes I think it can even exacerbate it because there's this feeling that there's unlimited resources. And I often like to use this saying that sometimes, and I'll use the term God, sometimes God provides by what he, excuse me, sometimes God guides by what he doesn't provide. Meaning, sometimes the lack of superabundant resources helps to actually provide focus and provide direction for the resources that you do have. It helps to spawn innovation because there is some form of limitation. And so when you view it through that lens, I think there's a few things that money alone can't fix. Some of the systemic issues can't be fixed by just throwing money at it. Structural as it relates to bigger issues, affordable housing. You could go down the whole path there. Some of those things are structural, some of those things are systemic, some of those things, and seeing it from all angles, being on both sides of equations, and seeing it from a variety of different seats throughout my journey. I can say that just throwing money at it doesn't fix it. Some of the things that you run into also are, you can give money to a situation, but if you are not deploying the capital in a way that actually is solving the problem, but only band-aiding and just kind of putting something on the problem, you can throw a lot of money at it and have a very nice band-aid, but you still have a cut. But you
Right.
still have a wound, but you still have an issue, you still have an injury. And so I think that requires leadership, both from a elected leader standpoint. That requires leadership from a philanthropic standpoint, to say, what is the problem we're solving? So in those board meetings, or in those discussions, or in that deployment of capital, if it's an individual or trust or whatever, in that, the conversation has to be, so what's the problem we're wanting to solve? Because just because we give money to ABC doesn't mean we're actually solving the problem.
Right.
What's the problem we're solving? And I think the way to do that is, I like to tack everything to data. I'm a data-driven decision maker. So I like to say, if I have done this, what did this produce? I need some data points, and I can't solve everything. But I want to know what I did solve. I can't fix all the problems in the world. I can't fix all the problems in the nation, in the community, in the city, whatever it might be. But I want to know the problems that I did fix. I want to know the problems that I did address. And I think that has to be tethered to data. And I think that requires leadership from a variety of different stakeholders, that just money alone won't fix. Because again, I mean, we see hundreds of millions, billions of dollars donated for a variety of different things. And many times we say, well, cool, what did we do except have a nice photo op, have a nice press release? And those are good things. And don't get me wrong, those are important things. That's not to degrade anything that anyone does. But I think we really have to ask ourselves the question, so what problem do we solve?
Right. And also, I would add to that, who are the right people to help solve that problem? Because
Absolutely.
in the world of philanthropy, there's often a criticism that the person who is donating money is not close to the work, is not close to the strategy, is not close to what the impact's going to look like. They're sort of dictating from afar, it should look like this. And there's a book called Winners Take All, and that it talks about exactly that issue, where you have people who have been successful in industry think they can come in and say that, we're going to solve some problems in the nonprofit world and some social issues, and they're really not well suited to do that. They're oversimplifying the solution, and that is where you see, $100 million could come in and never solve that problem. It's, instead of saying the opposite, which is sometimes there's no money that will solve that problem unless you get down to the core issues and say, who are the people that are most affected by this, and what are their solutions? What do they think? Maybe it's building community better. Maybe it's more leadership. Maybe it's better relations, better community relations. Maybe it is money at some point, but money might be one of the factors, but it's not the leading factor. And so your point is extremely well taken around breaking down the issue and saying, what is it that we're trying to solve for? Who are the right people at the table? What would success look like? And maybe then, where does money come in, if at all, to help solve for this? And if money isn't the issue, well, that's an interesting outcome, to say no amount of money would have helped this unless we've started to solve at this more granular level or this more strategic level, instead of thinking that money's going to come in and somehow we're going to use that to patch things up, when in fact it's premature or sort of ill-advised, right?
Right. No, I totally agree. Only thing I would add to that is, and I think that goes back to our previous question, which is for each individual, when you look or company or whatever it might be, whoever is being philanthropic and the giver, as I would use that term, I did what problem do I want to solve? Because maybe the problem I want to solve is I just want to give somebody the money to solve the problem.
Yeah,
That's a very different type of philanthropy than I want to solve the problem of X.
right.
And I think looking at it through those lenses, because some writing a check, and that's not to be looked down upon. Writing a check, it's just much easier to do that than to get in the granular level for whatever reason. That's a different type of philanthropy than someone saying, "I want to solve this problem or that problem." And there's not a right or a wrong. It's what best suits me. And what I do and dealing with people from every background, dealing from people from every walk of life, I have discovered that sometimes what works with one doesn't work with another. What I would tell to the same question, what I would give as counsel to one person and coaching to one person is very different than I'd give to the other person, even though the situation is the same. It's because they are different. And because they are different and what they're trying to do is different, it's not a one size fits all. And I think that's the beauty of it too, is there's a tapestry. Everybody doesn't have to be, boots on the ground, meeting with, okay, so now what's this? Everybody doesn't have to do that. If that's not what's a fit for you, you can still add substantive value in another way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, make me think of the silent partner, somebody who comes in and says,
Yes.
"What do you need from me? I'm not at the table, but I'll back up and trust whoever is at the table that they're going to solve the
Yes.
problems." In the world of charitable giving, sometimes we just call that an unrestricted gift. Here's the money. Do with it as you will, up to and including don't spend the money right now if you don't need to spend the money. But if you do need to spend the money, you have it here, and I trust that you'll help solve the problems. I'm really my role here is just to simply provide that financial capital if you need it. But I don't need to get my hands dirty, and I don't necessarily want to get in and have strategic conversations because I know that I'm not going to necessarily add any additional value to that.
Right, right. Which is very prudent, I think, too, to know that and to recognize that. I think that's really, really prudent.
Yeah, yeah. All right, another question for you. What does a sustainable approach to giving look like in your opinion? One that helps donors, nonprofit leaders, advisors move from emotional or episodic generosity to disciplined, purpose-driven philosophy or philanthropy. And you and I talked about that a little bit, but maybe just dive a little deeper into that.
Yeah, I think back to that point of really what are the problems I want to solve? And I think everybody is wired to have something that is a burden for you. And I think what is a burden is where you have the opportunity to be a great blessing. That's why everybody can look at a variety of different things and feel nothing. And then you can look at that thing and say, man, somebody should do something about that. Somebody needs to say something about that. Somebody needs to well, that somebody is you. Often the thing that bothers you is the place you're supposed to be a blessing. The thing that's a burden for you is the place where you are supposed to, be one who empowers others. And lifts the burdens of others. And so I think creating the philosophy is really tied to one, the individual or, a company, whatever that might be, the individuality of it. But then two, recognizing that you can't solve every problem, but I am going to do my best to address X, Y, Z. That becomes very important. So, for example, our organization, Harvest, what we did is we decided we didn't want to recreate anything that existed.
Okay.
So we decided we don't want to be in the business of, at one point, we ran the largest food and clothing bank in the Rocky Mountain region. And I said, but there's others that do it. I said, so even though we're the largest, I literally said, This is something we need to phase out and just support those that are already doing it." Because if we put our efforts behind them, they can go further and it allows us to hone in and focus. So we created a model that says we don't recreate the wheel. So if there's somebody else that's doing something that is one of the things we want to do, if they're doing it and they're doing it well, and we've got data points, our approach was we're going to support them versus making that something that we stand up on our own. That was the right fit for us. And it allowed us to have a much more systematic, and not, this random emotional or episodic, as you mentioned, type of thing. It allowed for us to create systems and structures around what we would do. Because for us, the thing became, let's not recreate what somebody else is doing. Let's help them.
Right. Let's be sensitive to the landscape and realize that back to solving the problem, if everyone's muscling in and saying, oh, we're the ones who are best suited to this, and then just not in sort of being blind to what's around you, then you're not really sensitive to what the needs are. But if you can say, we are the biggest, but let's look at what others are doing and let's see how we can fold into that and be part of a fabric, as you mentioned before, like a tapestry of help, then that's different from saying, we are completely oblivious to what else is happening out there, and that's not necessarily helping the constituency ultimately that you're trying to help. And they'll appreciate your sensitivity too, which is to say they're here to help, but they're also here to listen. They're not here to tell us necessarily it's going to be like this. They're here to stop and say, are we actually being sensitive to what the needs are? And are we working with others well to help use that community and use those various resources in the most a beneficial way? Or are we kind of stepping on each other's toes and sort of actually getting in each other's way, or the opposite? There's a gap right in front of us that no one's fulfilling because we're not listening to each other. We're not trying to help each other out.
Right, exactly. No, that's exactly it. And I think when you view it that way, again, back to the sense of what is the right fit for us. And so, and in our model, and even in anything that we do to this day, is okay, before we create something that becomes something that we run resources through, before we create something, who's doing it?
Right.
Then let's see what they're doing. And okay, great. They're doing an amazing job at that. Let us be partners. Let us support. Again, to your use of the term silent partner. Let us get them what they need. And then let's combine those efforts and have a greater impact. Again, based on data. So for me, I'm a data-driven decision maker. So it is not just we have a heart for this, we have a heart for that. Show me the numbers.
Right.
Show me the data. What did we do? How did we address XYZ issue? And that's just been such a much more fruitful way. And I will say, in our context, it allows for us to deploy manpower in a much more effective way, because we're not deploying manpower to try to just recreate what somebody else created. If there's a pizza restaurant right next to you, do you really want to set up another pizza restaurant right next door? At a
Right.
certain point, people are going to get confused and say, well, I mean, I was coming for pizza. Well, which one? Is it Pizza Bella or
Right.
Pizza Mamma Mia?
Yeah,
What is it?
right.
Like, which
Right.
one? I don't know. I don't, I just came for pizza. But what do you have? We got pepperoni. But what do you have? We got pepperoni. We got sausage. We got sausage too.
Right.
At a certain point, you just have to look at it and say, okay, we really want to be effective. And one of the ways we do that is we say, if we were to no longer exist today, would it matter that we did?
Yeah.
If we were to stop doing what we do today, would it matter that we did? If we were to stop being philanthropic today, would it ever matter that we did in the first place?
That's a great way to step back from it, because then it helps you strategically figure out who you are and how you need to show up in the community, versus feeling like, I think some would say the worst answer to the question you just asked is, yeah, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter if we backed away. No one would notice. We're not actually doing much. We're not solving much of a problem, versus I can't imagine what this community would do without us. We really are doing a lot. And it helps, I think, the institution focus and say, okay, so that's what people perceive we do. That's how people see we show up. Let's make sure that we're aware of that and make sure that we can lean into that in the most appropriate way to be as effective as we can be. But that question is a critical question, because we can assume that we are much more beneficial than we are, or we can assume that we are not making much of a difference when in fact we are absolutely part of the fabric of what that particular community needs. So it's really
Bingo.
interesting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, bingo. You got it. You hit it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Last question for you.
All right.
How can organizations and community movements like Harvest serve as practical models for nonprofit leaders, donors, and professional advisors who want to create measurable impact that outlives a single campaign and becomes part, as you were talking about earlier, becomes part of a long-term legacy?
Yeah, you know what? I think really that question has been the culmination of everything that you've asked, because I think really there were three quick takeaways. One, the individual, what is our individual mandate, and what are the problems we want to solve? And we can't solve everything, but I always encourage folks like get your three. What are your three? Because you can fight. I kind of look at it like a body. I can be fight one thing with one fist, another thing with another fist, and then another thing with a leg, but I gotta have one foot planted. I think sometimes, people and organizations, whatever, they're trying to do too many things, and size doesn't mean effective. If I was to use a biblical example, Goliath was a giant, but he wasn't that effective. Little
Right.
David took him out.
Right.
Just because you're big doesn't mean you're good. Might doesn't make right. Might doesn't mean that you're good. And so, what are your three? What are the three you're going to focus on that are problems you want to solve? And then I think the second, when you talk about a model, determining how much of this do we want to stand up and do on our own, and how much of this do we want to simply engage with those that are already doing it and helping them to go further faster. If we run this race as solo, we got to start from scratch. But if we run this race basically just, passing the baton, if you will, almost like a relay, where we help them and there's this symbiosis. I think that is a sustainable model, so that all of the weight isn't on one organization, one person, one man, one woman, so on and so forth. And then I think the third thing is constantly measuring what you're doing. Like
Yeah.
there's something we do, we call it harvest at a glance. We constantly measure what we do and what we've done and what the data points are to make sure what we're doing is effective. And we don't just measure it by the data in terms of numbers. We then measure it in terms of the impact in the lives of people. So I want to hear the stories. And those stories make a big difference, because again, back to the starfish, I think this whole conversation has really been one,
Yeah.
360. Back
Yeah.
to the starfish. If I don't hear from the starfish, I don't really know how I affected it, other than we saved 40 starfish. Oh, okay. Well, but I mean, how many were there to start with? Let's just say a big number out of 300. Oh, that doesn't sound very effective. Yeah, but that's a whole beach, right? That's a whole beachfront. And to those 40, what did that produce in the ecosystem? And the this and the that and the this and the that. And that was a mom. This was a dad. That was a family. That was a this. This one went and turned and became this and did that. There's so much. So to me, having the constant feedback loop, both in your data and in the stories of the lives that you are impacting through what you're doing, I think is really, really important, because it gives a human side to money in philanthropic efforts. Because most of it is, to your point, it's boardrooms, it's decisions, it's slides presentations, everybody turns, looks, it's slide presentations, it's this, it's that, it's that. But when you give a human face and when you hear a human story, I don't care if you're the meanest person on the planet, there is something that happens when you hear how your efforts are impacting somebody at the level of their humanity.
Absolutely. And I actually think at their core, it works together. For example, if I saw that impact story that you were just talking about, I saw a family affected, a person affected, I heard the outcome, I heard the impact. It should make me feel like, okay, can our organization help 10 people like that? Can it help
Yes.
50 people like that? Can it help 100 people like that? So that's where you go back to your data and say, well, how many people are we helping, and can we scale this to the extent of being able to help that many people? Or maybe we decide as an organization we're only going to help X number of people. That's the limitation that we have, but still the two go together. Here's the right brain, sort of softer side, emotional side, and here's the left brain, more analytical side, more business side of things. But the two can go together. And it reminds me of a woman I met before where she said, I thought I was a right brain person. I thought I was all about the stories. And I am, she said, but I'm also about the impact. I'm also about how are we going to take this to the next level? What will the numbers look like? Should I be leaning more into this? And so I think what I'm hearing you say, ultimately, it's an iterative process of looking at your data, looking to see where you are, looking to see if you should lean in more to what you're doing, or if you should be pivoting and saying, we don't need to lean that far into this. Maybe we should be moving over here, or maybe we should drop some things, stop doing some of these other things because they're not as effective. So that way we don't try to overextend ourselves, but actually we are out into the community doing the things that we need to be doing to make the most impact as Harvest. So, well, thank you so much, Bishop. I really appreciate this conversation today. It was very, very fulfilling on so many levels. How would people reach you? How would people reach Harvest? How would people learn about anything as far as what you're working on? Yeah.
Absolutely. BishopForeman.com, Foreman.com. That's the website. Best way to stay connected, find out everything. It's right there on the site. There's an app. There's tons of things that are there on the site. In addition to that, we're doing something that for your viewers, for your listeners, they can connect. And we've got great resources that are available for them. And so they can just text the word Bishop, BISHOP, to the phone number 55498. I know it'll be in the show notes for folks, but they can connect that way. We've got some special resources that we've prepared and have available and ready, and that I think will add great value to the lives of people. Let me just say this: thank you for what you do in creating these conversations. I'm a big believer that conversations are catalysts for transformation. Before anything changes, somebody had to talk about it. Before anything is different, somebody had to spark an ideology. Somebody had to spark an idea. Something had to spark, and that spark is always conversation. So thank you for what you do, and especially around these conversations and really empowering people in so many ways. So thank you, and thank you for having me.
I appreciate you saying that. It is an intentional act to be interviewing people, and I try to the best of my ability to get the right people on this program to talk about exactly the types of things we were talking about today. And to your point, I had a gentleman, even as recently as yesterday, say, Rick, I've been listening to your podcast episodes and I'm already getting a lot of great ideas. So it's, as you just said, it's like sparking what it is that they're going to do next. And maybe for a long time, people are just going to sit and listen. Then one day they're going to go, okay, I think I have enough ideas or enough drive here from listening to these conversations that I think I know where I want to go next.
Yeah, and that it's like a fire. You light it, and you don't know how fast it grows, how big it grows, what it turns into. So
Right.
Again, you're a fire starter over there. Good one, though. A good one.
And so are you. Absolutely, no question about it. So, all right. Well, thank you, Bishop. You're always welcome to come back and tell more stories of impact, more stories about how things turned out, because that's what it's all about, right?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. See you next time.
That wraps up today's conversation with Bishop Kevin Foreman, and I hope it encourages you to think differently about generosity, not simply as something we do occasionally, but as something that shapes who we become. Here are 3 key takeaways from today's episode. First, faithful giving is ultimately a mindset. When generosity becomes part of your identity, rather than a negotiation, it transforms the way you engage with others and the world around you. Second, impactful philanthropy requires clarity and intentionality. It's not about solving every problem. It's about understanding where you are uniquely called to contribute and focusing your efforts there. And third, lasting impact comes from collaboration, leadership, and measurable outcomes. The strongest organizations and movements don't simply recreate what already exists. They build partnerships, listen carefully, and create systems that continue serving others long after a single campaign ends. As you reflect on today's conversation, consider this question: what kind of legacy are you building? Not just financially, but through the way you show up, serve others, and invest in your community. Thanks for listening to Money to Give. If this conversation resonated with you, please leave a review on your preferred streaming platform, share it with a friend or colleague, and most importantly, keep that giving feeling going. We are now broadcasting in 37 countries and growing, with 500 downloads per month and nearly 10,000 downloads to date. A reminder, this podcast is meant to be for educational purposes only. For specific advice related to your own situation, please consult an attorney, financial advisor, CPA, or other type of trusted consultant. If you're looking for fresh insights on how to give smarter, raise more money, and advise your clients in a more informed way, please subscribe to my weekly newsletter, Charitable Giving News for You. Register by going to my website, thephilanthropyguy.com. In the newsletter, you'll also read about many of our podcast guests, while also getting helpful tips and advice for nonprofits, donors, and professional advisors. Meaningful giving starts with meaningful connection, so please connect with me, Richard Peck, on LinkedIn as well. Until next time, Let's keep making a difference together.